My name is Braden Rittenberry, and I'm a veteran of the United States Army. This service is being led by the UUSG Veterans Group. Those leading the service, in addition to myself this morning, are Aaron Fogelman, Brian Josie, Tracy McFadden, Chris Benshoff, Lynn Steele, Dave Duckworth, and Laz Escalona. Our theme this year is 250 Years of America, a celebration and a warning. There are a number of other UUSG veterans in our group who will not be overtly participating today. They would be Don Smith, Michelle Fleck, Elke Chateau, and Lauren Folks. We encourage any veterans here at UUSG who might be interested in joining our group to please contact any one of us, as we would love to have you join us. So now let us center ourselves with our words of welcome this morning from Ren Bellavance Grace. May we honor our veterans of wartime and learn how to care for those who have borne arms in our names. May we honor our veterans of peacetime and learn to care for all who step forward even without the certainty that all will remain calm. May we remember that each of those who are called to service is beloved. May we strive to create a community that is good and safe enough to welcome them home. Help those veterans who need to heal, that they may come to know themselves to be both loved and whole. Blessed be, and amen. I, along with other veterans from our church community, will be presenting to you not only a salute to veterans, but we will also take a closer, more personal look at subjects relating to war and our military service.
These are the times that try men's souls, Thomas Paine wrote in December 1776. After the British beat Washington, occupied New York City for the remainder of the war, and chased the Continental Army across New Jersey, while loyalist Americans rallied to the King's standard. Later, Philadelphia fell, and the Army holed up at Valley Forge during a long, desperate winter. Paine continued, "The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has a right not only to tax, but to bind us all in all cases whatsoever. And if being bound in that matter is not slavery, then there is not such a thing as slavery upon earth. Even the expression is impious, for so unlimited a power can belong only to God." I am Aaron Fogelman, a veteran of the U.S. Army, and I would like to welcome you to our service, the theme of which for this year is 250 Years of America, a celebration and a warning. A year after the election and 9 months after the inauguration, we are moving toward dictatorship in this country, massive support of genocide and Palestine that is now over, we hope, reckless use of the military abroad, arbitrary use of military force on the American people at home, illegal manipulations and assaults on and by the federal government, and direct internal threats to the U.S. Constitution, the oldest written constitution in the world, all in the name of an insurrection that never existed and so had to be manufactured. This is not what Paine, Washington, and the other founders intended. Today, we recognize the veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces at UUSG, UUSG family members who are or have been veterans, and we celebrate 250 years of independence, revolutionary ideals, and the armed forces that helped win and defend them. But we also cast a warning that current events push us in a different direction, away from the ideals of democracy, equality, life, liberty, and the pursuits of happiness that were so important to the founding of this country and its Constitution long ago.
Now this time I will be representing the military veterans and a task that they have had for the full 250 years. If you're like me, you're feeling conflict and even downright angry about the decisions and orders coming from our top military leaders today. How do you think those serving in the armed forces feel? When recruits join or are drafted into the military, they are required to take an oath and are bound by it for as long as they serve, even if they are ordered to do things they don't agree with. So, before I put too much blame on the soldiers carrying out orders, let's think about what they're up against and whether they should be held accountable for orders they are required to obey. Let me begin by reviewing the oath, the actual oath each member of the military is required to take. These oaths have remained constant for 250 years from the very beginning, since the Army was originally. So the enlisted oath, and officers are different. So the enlisted says, I, John or Jane Doe, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers over me. Now, the officer's oath is, I, John or Jane Doe, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I'm about to enter. You may have noticed that only the enlisted are required to obey the orders of the President of the United States and their superior officers, while officers swear an allegiance only to the Constitution. Throughout American history, soldiers have struggled with abiding by their oaths, and this is probably best exemplified by the enlisted soldier leading up to the American Civil War. These soldiers had followed their commanding generals, like Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, in confronting stated enemies of the entire United States. Then, these very same generals, along with other government leaders, decided to secede from the Union. What was the enlisted soldier to do? Follow the oath to the Constitution or the oath to their commanders? Vietnam is another example. Many people were drafted into Vietnam War and were required to take the oath even though they didn't agree with the war. Unfortunately, many of those soldiers were unjustly blamed for the events that occurred during that war and were met at home with hatred and hostility. The same can be said for the post-9/11 wars against terrorism in Iraq and Afghanistan. The suicide rate among these war veterans may be evidence of the conflict they endured. Today, our National Guard soldiers are being deployed in American cities to put down so-called riots, while Navy personnel are being ordered to assault boats off the coast of Venezuela without due process. Fortunately, there are high-level leaders who are pushing back against these actions. Doesn't that sound much like the Civil War today? General Mark Milley, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff until his retirement in September 2023, stated in his retirement speech that the military's loyalty is to the foundation laws of the nation, stating, "We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator, and we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. He explicitly said that the oath of the service to the Constitution and the idea that is America. Further, Admiral Alvin Halsey, commander of the Navy's United States Southern Command, chose to retire after only a year in that position, for a very high-level position to only accept it for 1 year. Perhaps he was conflicted by carrying out the current administration's military action against alleged drug boats operating in international waters. So, before we condemn the National Guard soldiers being deployed to American cities or laying blame on the feet of the Army or Navy personnel who are simply following orders in accordance with the oath they've taken, let us instead think about who is giving those orders and remember that the ordinary soldier has taken an oath to obey orders. Let us place blame where the blame is warranted. Thank you.
I am Lynn Steele, and I'm going to talk about Revolutionary War benefits and how they were adapted over the years, 250, for veterans in our country, using information from my ancestors. Among my 21 ancestors who fought in the Revolutionary War, I have verified 7 who applied for veterans benefits. After the war, the United States government offered what was called bounty land warrants. The veteran was required to state as fully as possible what unit and units they were attached to, as well as a history of conflicts or duties they were engaged in. These are very interesting to read for historians and for those of us who like to do genealogy because they're very detailed. They were claims for property in designated areas that were opened after treaties with native tribes who ceded land to the United States. The country could then sell that land for settlement or award it to veterans. The biggest area newly opened was in Ohio, but there were areas open all over the unsettled countryside as shown on this map. The veteran could take the warrant and stake out the allotted plan of land and trade that warrant for a title to that property. But many veterans did not actually move to the area. They sold the warrant to someone who wanted to settle in the area and then used the money for their immediate use instead of moving. I have verification that 2 of my 7 ancestors actually moved, but one of them had traded his warrant for land in another state so he could move to where his family was already living. Just 1 month after July the 4th, 1776, on August the 26th, 1776, the Continental Congress passed a pension law providing half pay for life for any soldier totally disabled from war wounds. And then a later act of Congress established cash benefits for veterans who became unable to work later in life. One of my veteran ancestors did apply for this late in his life, and this is a transcript of his application for one of those old age cash pensions. What was important about all these acts is that they established a precedent for providing veteran benefits from the very start of the war and the birth of our nation. That system remained in place for veterans to use in relation to combat during the War of 1812, on through various Indian wars such as the Winnebago Uprising in 1828, the Black Hawk War in 1832 in our state, and up to and through the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 48. Here's a land warrant issued to another of my ancestors who fought in the War of 1812. He used this to get land in newly released area after the Indian removal treaties opened up new land in Missouri. After the Civil War, the USA and some southern states set up separate monetary disability payments for veterans and their families. In the case of my two great-great-grandpas, they received disability payments in the last years of their life once they were too feeble to work. Here on the left is from Illinois, and he got his U.S. federal pension, and his wife received half of that amount after he died. However, Romine on the right was a CSA veteran. Because those veterans fought for individual states, a Southern Veterans Compensation Plan said that they were to get money from individual states, and they were about half the amount that federal veterans received. Romine got his pension through the state of Alabama, and his wife got half that once he died. The federal USA pension relied on paying a pension only once a veteran was disabled. And that was the case of both of my great-great-grandparents. But the Homestead Act gave preferences to northern veterans, letting them deduct their time of service from the 5-year rule for developing a homestead, as well as lower fees for trading those warrants for the deed. And the U.S. federal legislature also set up veteran hospitals and nursing homes that were precursors of the VA healthcare system we have today. That type of veteran system continued the benefits, but updated them as the veterans' needs changed. This stayed in place through the Spanish-American War and into the early 20th century. My two grandpas were not of the right age to join or be drafted in World War I. It was very short in our engagement, but they had friends who did. For those veterans, there were big changes in disability coverage with the new Act of Congress in 1919, creating a disability rating system for cash benefits and medical services. And then a new program passed in 1924 that gave veterans a bonus certificate which allotted $1 per day for service in the States, and $1.25 per day for time spent overseas, not to exceed $500. These bonuses were not supposed to be paid until 1945, but could be used as collateral to borrow money, like to buy a home or a business. They could also be passed on to their widows. By 1932, as the Depression worsened, and with so much unemployment, veterans protested to have payments made immediately. And there were demonstrations called bonus marches. Some were met with violent suppression. But early payments were not made until Congress finally acted to move up the date in 1936. My dad, a World War II veteran, was only disabled a short time before his cancer took his life. But Dad did not take advantage of any veterans benefits or any part of the GI Bill. But my stepmom did apply for a veteran's headstone through the VA after his death. After the end of World War II, the VA benefit system was modernized, and the VA health system was greatly expanded. And that has grown into the large health care and disability department that exists today, with benefits tied primarily to a much more detailed rating system. And instead of land warrants or bonus certificates, the GI Bill created education funds and home and business loan guarantees. In my case, in recent years, I have received many benefits from VA, especially those related to my hearing loss from being in the artillery in Vietnam, and then later with medical treatment and compensation to my diseases related to my exposure to Agent Orange and PTSD. Because of that experience, I always like to take a moment to state my appreciation for the care and treatment I received through the VA. I have been well treated at Hines Hospital and at my local clinic, which is down Route 21 right before, Route 31 right before I-88. It has definitely contributed to my reaching my fairly healthy age of 81 this next Sunday, November 16th. Any large organization like the VA is going to have problems over time. But because the VA has worked to enhance the lives of so many veterans, I feel the VA deserves to continue having my fellow citizens' support when it is attacked by those who like to see parts of it dismantled. Those who want to replace direct medical care with vouchers do not understand that the care the VA gives and the treatments they have developed for physical and mental injuries unique to military life and combat cannot be purchased on the private economy. Peter Coe, who we're going to talk about later, is a perfect example of this with his dedication to counseling fellow veterans through the VA. We should monitor the VA to make certain it provides the services we expect and follow the standards we require, but we should not attempt to replace its life-saving and life-enhancing services with vouchers, thoughts, and prayers.
I'm going to talk to you about celebrations and warnings from 1776. There is much to celebrate from 1776, and now we should celebrate our 250th anniversary, or semi-quincentennial. I just learned that word, and I'm still learning how to spell and pronounce it. Maybe you are too. Patriotic Americans certainly celebrated the first Independence Day. On July 4th, Congress commissioned John Dunlap of Philadelphia to print copies of the Declaration to distribute throughout the new states, which he did that evening. On July 6th, the Pennsylvania Evening Post became the first newspaper to print the document. On July 8th, Colonel James Nixon, son of an Irish immigrant, read the document outside Independence Hall to a cheering crowd, the first public reading of the Declaration. That same day, individuals publicly read the document in Easton, Pennsylvania, and in Trenton, New Jersey, and from there up and down the states in public squares and church pulpits to soldiers and civilians. On July 9th, George Washington was at his Continental Army headquarters in New York City, contemplating the difficult military situation when he heard the news and ordered the Continental troops to march to the parade ground in Lower Manhattan to hear a new declaration approved by Congress. After the reading of the Declaration, the troops toppled the gilded lead statue of King George III on horseback and melted it down into bullets. These guys did not like kings. When the Declaration was read in Savannah, Georgia on August 10th, a crowd parodied the Church of England's service for the burial of the dead for King George and the tyranny they thought he represented. Celebrations varied from city to city and from state to state. Public readings were frequently accompanied by cheering, the firing of cannons, the ringing of bells, and if they didn't ring the Liberty Bell, they should have, except it was broken, so they couldn't, but they should have. They did, let's just say they did. There were dinners and toasts, often one for each of the 13 states. Some readings were also accompanied by parades, the erection of liberty poles, and the destruction of royal symbols like the king's coat of arms or the royal flag. By the next year, the tradition of organized celebration with fireworks was set. According to the July 5th, 1777 edition of the Pennsylvania Evening Post, yesterday, the 4th of July, being the anniversary of the independence of the United States of America, was celebrated in this city with demonstrations of joy and festivity. About noon, all the armed ships and galleys in the river were drawn up before the city, dressed in the gayest manner, with colors of the United States and streamers displayed. At 1 o'clock, the yards being properly manned, they began the celebration of the day by a discharge of 13 cannon from each of the ships and one from each of the 13 galleys in honor of the 13 United States. The evening was closed with the ringing of bells, and at night there was a grand exhibition of fireworks, which began and concluded with 13 rockets. It was on the Commons, and the city was beautifully illuminated. As for the Declaration itself, we now know that there are problematic details within it, but the ideals it celebrated and promoted are the most important part. Expression and belief in them was part of a larger movement that it gave impetus to, and that movement became a model for later revolutions and movements for political and social justice throughout the world. The victory in 1783 secured independence, set the course for dramatic successes with the American military and diplomacy that secured the economic and political growth and impact of America to this day, led by the U.S. Army, of course, now 250 years old. The Constitution received a mixed reaction at the time, and ratification was brutal. But later it was respected by virtually all Americans and emulated throughout the world. After much dissension during the Revolution, by 1800, there was a strong consensus for independence and the Constitution. Washington Irving's short story, Rip Van Winkle, addressed this point. The 20 years that Rip slept through were the American Revolution. And when he woke up and toasted the king, he was nearly beaten up and run out of town because no kings were allowed anymore. Ultimately, in later American and even world history, there's a long list of radicals, from leaders of the anti-slavery and civil rights and women's movements to socialists here and abroad, who supported the Declaration and the Constitution. They were angry not at the documents, which they praised, but that their ideals were not being lived up to. Life, liberty, pursuits of happiness, democracy, and equality have been ideals worth living up to and fighting for just about everyone. America became an experiment, breakaway colonies, an extended republic with a written constitution. Others in Latin America, Europe watched, and many tried something similar. But the warning bells that rang during the protests and tensions and repression and violent actions that led to 1776 continued afterwards and are still with us. Government abuse of power. During the imperial crisis of the 1760s and 70s, when the British government still was the American government, and many times since and now. This includes use of government troops on its own people, massive corruption in government spending, manipulation of government power, and other aspects of authoritarianism. There have been crises throughout American history in which the ideals of the Revolution and commitment to the documents pronouncing and celebrating them have been endangered. The crises in 1800, 1861, 1932, and 1968 come to mind, as well as now. These are the darkest moments in American history. Internal tensions have twice escalated into all-out civil war in 1776 and 1861. At a cabinet meeting last August 26, Donald Trump declared that a lot of people would prefer a dictator if it meant stopping crime. He denied being a dictator himself, but noted that he just knows how to stop crime, adding, "If that's the case, I'd rather have a dictator." A few Americans have always preferred a dictatorship, but almost all preserve life, liberty, the pursuits of happiness, democracy, and equality. And they do want us to follow the Constitution to promote and protect these ideals. During the Revolution, Benjamin Franklin spoke about the tentativeness of a republic and echoed an early expression of his that those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserved neither liberty nor safety. So let's remember what to celebrate and keep the fires of 1776 burning. They meant a lot then, ever since then, and they still do. And let's celebrate those armed forces who served honorably throughout these 250 years and still do to help ensure that we have something to celebrate. Thank you.
I invite you to remain standing and quiet, to bring attention for the playing of taps.